Welcome back. A few months ago, we completed the design of the Raspberry Pi trivia game daughter board or hat. We manufactured 5 or 6 of those and completed the construction of one. We have not completed the detailed design videos, but I thought that I would go ahead and put the full assembly together to give you a good idea of how the total game works. Here we're looking at one of the player buttons. It's made out of 1x4, constructed in a box shape with a piece of plywood, thin plywood, 1/8 on top with a 1-inch hole so that we could mount those dual buttons which have LED lights indicators and a normally open SPST switch. The player will depress those buttons in order to indicate that he wants to answer. We're going to mount the daughter board on top of the Raspberry Pi. To the right is the daughter board below the buttons and the Raspberry Pi on the left. We're going to use brass standoffs to mount it permanently to the Raspberry Pi. In order to do this, I have several standoff kits, brass standoffs of different sizes and lengths with the associated hardware, nuts, and screws. They're very convenient for mounting circuit boards to chassis and to each other. To get started, we're going to protect ourselves by attaching our static wristband. The blue surface underneath the buttons in the area that you see is a large static mat. We should always protect ourselves so that any static electricity that may be in our hands or build up on our body would not damage the circuits. This is the daughter board with the 5 RJ22 connectors that the buttons and the moderator button assembly will connect to. The connectors on the bottom will mate to the GPIO connector. To the left you see the GPIO connector here. You'll see 2 standoffs are already attached on the side opposite of the GPIO with a standoff protruding upward on the top. That will allow us to permanently attach the daughter board. So let's take a look and see if we can find the right standoff. We need 2 more standoffs on the connector side so that the Raspberry Pi can be attached with 4 attachment points on the bottom to a chassis if you wish to put it in an enclosure or on a board or in any way that you would want to mount it. The standoffs allow you to have a uniform 4-point mounting of the assembly into some type of enclosure or on some type of surface. So I'm inserting the screws here and the little brass, I guess it's about a 1/2-inch standoff on this side, on the connector side. As you noticed earlier, there were 2 other standoffs protruding from the bottom, so this will just provide the additional 2 standoffs. Now this assembly will be very, very compact, and it could be mounted in a very small enclosure. The buttons, as you see, have white cables coming out of them. We'll talk more about those later and how to connect those up and how to get the appropriate RJ22 connectors on the end. And we will, those actually can be obtained fairly easily and are fairly economical. Here I'm aligning the daughter board. You will see on this side the brass standoffs will hold the daughter board in the right position opposite of the GPIO connector. So all that's necessary now is align the connectors, press it down, and then we will attach the right side through 2 screw holes to the standoffs that are protruding upward. This will hold the daughter board uniformly and flat on the Raspberry Pi main board. Okay, it's time to connect up the player buttons. The four player buttons have 10 feet of phone style cable with RJ22 connectors or 4P 4C style connectors. It's easy to connect these. They simply slide in. They have a small tab that snaps in. Four conductors in each of these, two for the button itself and two for the LED indicator in the button. The cable should be long. When you deploy your electronics, it'll probably be out of the way and a distance from the location of the players. One button assembly remains, the moderator button. The moderator button includes two normally open single pole buttons, small buttons. We constructed that with a piece of breadboard and attached a flexible phone cable. The moderator will use those two buttons to control the progress of the game. Two normally open single pole buttons. The contacts close when you depress them, just like the player buttons. So let's connect this up and then we can get the game finished. And on the connection side, we'll need a TV with an HDMI connector, a couple of power supplies, and we can go through the process of testing the game and demonstrating it in full assembly. Oh, it looks like I forgot to change the RJ45 connector on the end of that cable. We're going to have to do that before we can go further.